welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. I am so excited for today's show. This is one that we stumbled into sideways, and I am just so happy to be able to have this conversation today, because not only is it really, really topical and timely, but it's also one that is really important. And it's really important because one of the problems that we've had is we're not great as a society at having conversations around difficult or hotbed topics. Today, it's going to be hotbed topic. We're talking vaccinations, and we're talking in particular reluctance around vaccinations. We're talking with somebody today who has gone the whole gamut of the thing in such an impressive way. I just don't even have the words. And I am so excited to welcome Lydia Greene to the show. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to talk to Canadians. I don't get too many opportunities to talk to Canadians, and so I'm very happy to be here.
And just for anybody who's watching the video, the blurred out loaf of bread that you're currently holding.
Yes, I'm just holding a loaf of bread.
What can I ask? What the little dog's name is?
Kevin.
Kevin?
Yeah.
What's up, Kevin? He's chill now.
Yeah, he is very chill. He always wants to be with me.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Lydia, before we get into the whole back to the vax, back to the facts, all of the rhyming, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself in broad terms? I know that there's some we want to be respectful of your privacy.
So I am an Albertan, and I used to be in my early career, I used to be a quality control chemist for a pharmaceutical plant. So I worked in a science-based industry, and I did quality control for starting in materials, reaction monitoring, final product. And I'm very keenly aware of how that side of things works regarding audits and documentation and how rigorous it is. And I met my husband, and we decided to leave the city and start a family. And I was still very pro-science, pro-vaccine. And we had a daughter. And at her 2-month appointment, well, let's go back. So when I was pregnant, I had felt pressured into a C-section I didn't really want. And then I had issues with breastfeeding, and the doctor wasn't much help. So I reached out to this online forum of like attachment parents called Mothering. And Mothering still exists. It's not as popular as it once was, but it's the OG attachment parenting internet forum. This was back 2008. And when I reached out to the mothers in this group, the advice they gave me was so helpful. And I was able to salvage the breastfeeding relationship I was trying to have, with my baby. And I kind of felt like I had a home, where if I was struggling with parenting, I could ask for advice. And because the advice worked the one time, I just kind of felt like, I could trust them. And I was still pro-vaccine, even though I was like trying to do all the other natural parenting things. I still planned to vaccinate. At the appointment, I remember feeling some trepidation and thinking, I can't undo this once I do it. Like that, there's no way to remove it. Whatever processes are happening are going to happen. And what if I'm making a mistake? My husband calmed me down and said, like, this is for the good of her and the good of society. And like, why would they be trying to like harm children? That's silly. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And she got her vaccines, and I brought her home. And later that night, she started this like long protracted cry. She would sleep these deep sleeps. She just seemed unwell. And I'm going to say, like, up until that point, I don't even think I really heard her cry, because she was a very content baby. And as long as she was, fed and warm and happy, like held, she was a very content baby. So even just hearing this protracted, high-pitched crying, it tugged at my heartstrings in a way that I never felt as a parent, up until that point. And so I called the nurse the next morning after just being up all night with her, and the nurse was like, listen, like, this sounds totally normal to me. You're a first-time mom and you're anxious, but like, this is normal, and if you really think something's wrong with her, just take her to the ER. And it made me feel embarrassed, made me feel dumb, but also I still was so worried about her. And so I went to the same forum that I had gone for other things in the past, and what they told me like shook me to my core. And it wasn't like they just told it to me and I was like, oh, like they had like vaccine inserts and all the things anti-vaxxers use to scare parents out of vaccinating. And it does say that in the DTaP insert, but people don't realize inserts are a legal document, and adverse events are not side effects. Adverse events are things that happen that are not necessarily linked. They're just reported, and life still happens after vaccination. Like that's, correlation isn't causation. But I was so terrified as a parent that it sunk in, and it gave me a way to never have to go through that again. So when she was 4 months, I was like, okay, so DTaP caused this DTaP cry encephalitis thing. So she's clearly not going to have DTaP again. It says so right in the insert. And I let her get 2 other vaccines that were not DTaP, and she was fine. I didn't even, she didn't have any like side effects or anything. She was totally fine after that. But it still wasn't enough for me to lose that anxiety. And as I stayed in this group, I just kind of became more and more concerned about not just vaccination, but quote unquote toxins in general. Worried about plastics, worried about pesticides, worried about everything. Like it just gets to a point where there's invisible enemies everywhere. Like, and the people in these groups it is fueled by anxiety, and this wanting to do the very best, and other parents that don't, you kind of get into this like cultish thinking that other parents that don't live the way you do obviously don't care as much as you do, or they're lazy, or they're whatever. And these are some very ugly, nasty thoughts that I have to deal with, like, as a person, and knowing that I held them, but it's the best way. The best way to deal with being wrong is just to lean into it. Otherwise you're not going to learn anything. So I had to sit with that for a bit. And I stayed anti-vax after that for 12 years. So I had 2 more kids. I did all of the crunchy things, and I didn't vaccinate those 2 children either. And then COVID happened, and I started seeing this thing in the anti-vax movement that made me question them. And that was one of the tropes, is like vaccines didn't help. It was sanitation. Sanitation is what brought disease rates down and improved the health of the community. And that's a lot of these things are half truths. That is a truth. It's a part of the picture, but it's not the entire part of the picture. And so when COVID happened and nobody wanted to wear masks, even though masks are like a sanitation practice, like it's a barrier method to prevent spreading germs, and nobody wanted to do it. I was like, this is, to me, hypocritical, because that's what we were saying, and now that's not applicable. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then with the collapse of I was wondering if the economy was going to go under and all these horrible things were going to happen. My parents are from the former Yugoslavia. Money became worthless sometimes, and that's happened in other countries. And then infrastructure and public health and all these things start to kind of go under. diseases come back. And I wasn't one of the anti-vaxxers that was like, these diseases are fine, but I thought, conditions could make them worse. So if you're not eating right, well, you're not whatever, so maybe I want to vaccinate my kids for one or two diseases. And I looked into, I always heard this rumor that the blood-brain barrier doesn't fully form until they're 2 or 3. And my youngest was 2. And so that was where my research was, to figure out when he could start getting vaccinated with my older 2. And that's when I realized that's not true. Like, I could not find a single piece of evidence or age, this arbitrary age that they mentioned. There's no evidence for it. So I had to really sit with being wrong and really wrong. And that's basically what made me start investigating all of these tropes that I had believed for the last 12 years, basically. And one by one, I was like really surprised to see that I didn't have the whole entire picture, and that the things I believed were based on like little tiny things that were true, maybe, but like extrapolated to a myth, and I had to admit that I was wrong.
I want to kind of go back to the beginning a bit there, because you were talking, one of the things in everything that you said there, it's very clear that you wanted to do what's best for your kids, and you wanted to do what's best, what you believed was best for your kids. And I think that that's a really important piece to highlight, because I think that one of the anti-vax tropes is that these people are all ignorant redneck hicks who don't care about anyone but themselves. And I don't think that's true. It almost seems like, when you started as a new parent, I mean, one of the things that you said was, as you were going through the C-section piece and feeling like you were pressured to go into the C-section piece, and then you talked about the breastfeeding and the dismissal. Do you think that there's, and I'm probably going to get some comments on this one, but do you think that there's some responsibility for distrust in the medical profession by practitioners who are so immersed in the science and the evidence that they forget how to communicate that to patients?
Yeah. One of the things I do, and I've done it a few times with my partner, we talk to medical professionals on how to improve communication. The things that we experienced in the medical system that caused us to lose our trust, and how they can potentially improve that communication to prevent people from going down the roads we did. And I'm not going to sit there and say it wasn't my fault, I have no responsibility in my choices. Like, when I say that, some people have kind of like, oh, you just don't want to take. I take full responsibility. There are things that I have to live with, that I will get into a bit later, that were a direct result of my choices. And my point to talk to medical professionals isn't to say it's your fault I was an anti-vaxxer. It's to say, here, if you want to prevent this, here is how you can improve communication so that there is a rapport, so that there is trust, and that when you say you should vaccinate your baby, they trust you to do that. And so that's my only goal by, talking to health professionals about that. But yeah, I think there are certain ways that communication can be improved. One of them is just listening. A lot of times I think medical professionals are afraid that if they listen to their reasoning in full, that they're going to breathe life into these terrible ideas. And so their gut instinct, their knee-jerk reaction is to stop them from talking and say, no, you're wrong. Sometimes it's annoyance, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's like patronization. So there's different ways that kind of put up a wall, and the parent stops talking and goes somewhere else for advice that you don't want them going. You want to listen to them in full and empathize, like, wow. And sometimes you may not have even heard of this myth or know right away if it's like, if there's any truth to it. Don't even try to fill in the blanks. If you hear it and you don't know it, say, that sounds awful. I've not heard that before. I'm going to look into that for you and let me get back to you. Because it at least lets the parent know that you're willing to listen and investigate. And that builds trust. It may take a little longer.
Well, that to me kind of informs where you were talking about the Facebook or group or the mothers group. I don't know if it's a Facebook group.
Yeah, it's a private Facebook group.
Okay.
Facebook. Yeah.
Because you went from the uncomfortable, not satisfying conversation with the GP, I'm guessing, about the breastfeeding, which is, to be clear, like we've talked about this before on the show as well. I can't speak from any direct personal experience, but that's something that a lot of new moms struggle with, and it's something that is very, very poorly talked about because a lot of people treat it like it's an expectation of it's natural, you should be able to do it, no big deal. But it's not. It's not that. So you had a physician who, it sounds like, kind of minimized your experience, and you went to a group that was then able to provide you some comfort and some hope, even if there was some other stuff going on in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's talk about how did you go from a place of, because you were, and please correct me if I'm mischaracterizing, you were a pretty public proponent against vaccination.
Heather was more public. My partner, Heather Simpson, had a huge following. I participated, but I wasn't, quote unquote, like an influencer, like with thousands and thousands of followers.
Okay.
The following, it came after I came out as, wow, I just changed my mind on something I believed so long. Like, it was such a long held belief, and I was trapped in these echo chambers. I would pride myself on like reconsidering vaccination every year, but I would go back to the same group to ask, and so I would come up with the same conclusion every time, and I'd be like, see, I am open-minded, but it wasn't true. Like, I was just going back to the same people to ask, should I vaccinate? Is there any reason I could do a couple? Like, and they're like, no, it's toxic, it's bad. So you're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, it's still bad. But
what drove that shift for you?
So back to COVID happening and just wondering if I should do a couple of vaccinations in case society totally bottomed out. It was just taking apart one thing that I was so stubbornly, I believed in it so much, and just realizing I was very wrong about one thing. And that's another thing anti-vaxxers do. It's like a gish gallop or a fire hose, is like when they want to talk to you online about their beliefs, is they'll throw 20 different things they believe about vaccination at you, and you can't really address 20 different things. And it's a defense mechanism on their behalf. And it shows like how much they've memorized, like how much they know, because they do sit there and study and study and study these tropes till they're basically verbatim, like they can just spout it out, no problem. And that is a defense mechanism. So if you are talking with someone that you care about in your life as anti-vax, I highly recommend just saying, listen, let's leave it to one thing. Let's fully explore the one thing you believe about vaccination that is bad. Because if it devolves into multiple things, you don't really have a hope to penetrate that shell that they've created to convince themselves vaccines are the worst thing ever. So you have to go one thing. And so for me, that one thing was the blood-brain barrier. Like, I fully thought vaccines cause neurological damage by crossing an immature blood-brain barrier in infancy, And I believed other tropes as well about like immune dysfunction and a bunch of other, very common things. But that was the one thing that was deconstructed where I was like, I am super wrong about that. And that's what set me down the path to investigate other things that I was wrong about. So I don't know if it'll always work, but that's what worked for me and a few other people I know, is just knowing they were really wrong about one thing they were so sure of.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you bring up the 20, 30, 40 things that somebody will bring up in a conversation, you see that a lot, and it's very, very hard to address, because when somebody has 10 facts, and I'm air quoting the hell out of that for the audio listeners, even if you are able to disprove one of them, they still have the other 9 that they feel like haven't been disproved. And it gives them a place to kind of go, well, there's still all this.
Mm-hmm. And they won't fully explore any of them. So that's why I really recommend, like, if they want to have the discussion with you, like, fully explore and don't make it like a point of discussion. Like, we're not even going to go to the other, issues you have until we fully explore this one. And another thing I go on about is the hierarchy of scientific evidence. A lot of people, they'll say, I did my own research. I'm like, well, but that requires a lens. If you're going to use science, you have to use a scientific lens. And that lens is the hierarchy of evidence. So, you have stuff like opinion papers at the very bottom, and they'll use that as like a reason that nobody should be getting vaccinated. And that's just an opinion paper from one guy. Anybody can write an opinion paper and put it in a journal. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Or they'll use like in vitro, like a lot of the IVM supporters, the ivermectin supporters out there, right now, they're using in vitro studies to say ivermectin can cure cancer. Well, ivermectin, okay, sure, bleach also kills cancer cells in a petri dish. Like,
So does fire.
Yeah, fire, any battery acid, like, there are so many things that will kill cancer cells. That doesn't mean anything. But they're waving around these papers like this is, and some of them are taking copious amounts of it, thinking it's going to solve all these health issues. Like, and there's no real evidence in favor of that. Just a few in vitro studies, maybe a mouse study. Like, it's insanity to use that as evidence. There's a reason there's a hierarchy, So
Is it about a sense of control? I mean, one of the topics that I shouldn't say topics, one of the themes that we've sort of explored on the show over the last couple of years has been with COVID, with the pandemic, with all of the uncertainty that's people have had to navigate because of the ridiculous times that we've been living through. Do you think that there's a part of this that comes back to people wanting to just get some kind of a sense of control over their lives? And if even if there's just like a surface ivermectin, just like fire kills cancer cells, well, that's something. Do you think there's a part of that?
I think that's part of it. I think control. I think the appeal of thinking you know better than everyone else. That's why I even interviewed a cult expert on this stuff, because there is so many cultish aspects to the way these people think, and just discussing my own experience and how it felt very cult-like, and it's nice to have that validation. Like, yeah, that was pretty messed up way to live your life, but I think there's also an appeal to inaction. And I think that's big in anti-vax groups in general, but even with the COVID vaccine is, if I vaccinate my kid and something goes wrong, I did that. As a parent, I'm responsible for making that choice. However, the world is chaotic. And if my kid somehow, fate gives them COVID and they have a heart, that wasn't me, that was the world. And I didn't decide anything. So there's this like appeal to like inaction. And the more time that goes by that you don't make a hard decision, the more likely that not doing it is validated in your mind.
Okay.
That's why, you know, at first, when I first didn't vaccinate my kids, I was a little nervous about them getting any kind of vaccine preventable disease. But the longer time went by that nothing bad happened, I was more secure in my choice to not do it. And I think we see that with the COVID vaccine too. And that's why you have these people with huge regret, you know, after they get COVID, like, oh man, I was pretty healthy. I thought I would be fine. I regret not doing that. But the appeal to inaction, especially if they've gotten away with being sick before and nothing bad happening, it just seems more appealing than, you know, taking a 15-minute detour on the way home to get a vaccine you've heard nothing but bad things about.
With the inaction piece, this is the other piece that I'm super curious about, because you didn't just go, oh, I got that wrong. I'm going to do some vaccines and go to Starbucks. You decided to go down a pathway of advocacy and having, what drove you to that? I mean, it's a highly polarized, highly contentious,
yeah.
highly emotional issue that's very, very charged with people who like to say crazy things sometimes threats of violence. And you decided to go, you know what? I'm not only going to acknowledge that I had some flawed beliefs. I'm going to try to move the needle. What brought you to that?
You know, they're going back to like the cult-like aspects. These choices that mothers are making are driven by high anxiety. Every choice they make, like, I feel like a lot of precious moments being in this like alternative medicine, anti-vax, organic, crunchy cult, a lot of like joy was robbed from my life. A lot of stress was put into my life. I always felt like I never fit in. I always was like putting myself on, you know, the outskirts of trying to make friends because they were mainstream. Like it's such a lonely, isolating, anxiety riddled path. And if one mom hears me who is going through that same loneliness and anxiety, and they can see it as like a way out of that, to lighten up, to enjoy their lives again, to not have every single, like when you're in some of these, like it goes into like these pipelines, like go everywhere, you know, and one minute you're not vaccinating and the next minute you're cutting out complete food groups out of your life because you heard they were toxic, and now you can't even enjoy a Christmas dinner at someone's house. And it starts affecting every aspect of your life and creating these fences to keep you in, you know, that don't actually exist. And I just want these mothers to hear me, and if they're ready to get out, to feel like they're not alone. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I keep going back to this idea that's been percolating through my head as you've been talking. What do you think it requires for people to hear that it's okay to be wrong and know it?
I don't know. I will tell you this. Not a single person came at me and said, I told you so. Like, I know we were, like, I think that's a fear too that people have. Like, how can I face people? I've been like this for so long, you know? How am I going to do it? Well, nobody's going to say that to you. Like everyone has been so kind and welcoming, and so that's, if you're worried about that, I wouldn't. But the other thing is I think people, I mean, no one wants to think they've been wrong about something. Like
I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is, nobody, you were just saying nobody wants to be wrong. And I don't think anybody's like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be wrong about at least 6 things, and I'm going to do it as spectacularly as I can. But when you have that moment of realization, especially when it's something that's so heartfelt, what do you want those moms or dads to, or grandparents or whoever, to hear when they're on that cusp of, oh, did I just do a really big thing badly? What do you want them to know? Because that's for people who are in these situations, especially when we get into the really really crunchy stuff. Um, there's that's not a fun realization to come to.
And it's, I don't think there's an easy answer there, because especially if your identity is tied into it and your community is tied into it, there's so many layers of like why you would be reluctant to leave, even if it's become your personal hell, you know. But I also think if you're gonna do it big, like lean right in there. Because it's like if you do something really embarrassing and then you try to like deny it happened or play it off, like it makes it last way longer, right? Like, but if you just own it and lean into it, people forget it even happened, And so I would recommend, if anyone is like on that cusp, to just like really lean into it, explore it, have some sleepless nights. I did. Like I had a lot to, you're going to go through some psychological difficulty. And I think that's why so many people, even when it starts getting silly, like when more and more flat earthers started joining anti-vax, and there was more and more like evangelical influence and people talking about satanic panic, I couldn't embrace those ideas, but some people will, because it's more psychologically comfortable to just dig your heels in and just follow the group. But there's no growth there. There's no, you're not gonna understand the whole topic fully. You're denying yourself information that, if you really want to do your own research or really want to know, then you're going to do what's uncomfortable. But I can't convince people to do what's uncomfortable. Like it has to just become, the alternative has to become so uncomfortable that you're willing to explore that. And that's where I got. Like a lot of this stuff led me down some really horrible paths. I ended up with an eating disorder that is now, it's not in the DSM-5 yet because I can't really classify it as a true eating disorder or an obsessive compulsive disorder, but it's called orthorexia, where you become so obsessed with food, your safe foods start becoming more and more limited. And I got to a point after my last child where like I had lost so much weight. I was constantly anxious, probably because I didn't have enough blood sugar, without looking back. And everything tasted like paste. Everything tasted like poison, because I knew, and I was exposed to so many, wellness gurus talking about what is toxic, what is safe, that everything became unsafe because I take all this stuff in and I'm a perfectionist and I try to live perfectly, So it's that the culmination of all of that made my life such a living hell that exploring the discomfort of being wrong became much easier. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate that I had to get to that point. But I think a lot of people who leave cult-like beliefs, that's what it boils down to. Is like they're being in it is way more uncomfortable than the cognitive dissonance, and the being in it is way more uncomfortable than exploring that you might be wrong. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does make sense. I mean, it leaves me with the uncomfortable question of there's obviously you went to some I'm going to go ahead and use the word extremes, and I apologize if that comes off.
No, it is extreme. I could barely eat food. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty extreme.
Pretty extreme. Are you the question that leaves me with is, for all of the people, because we do have, especially here in Alberta, a lot of people who are extraordinarily vaccine hesitant. They haven't gone all the way down the rabbit hole of the extreme wellness stuff, but there is a distrust in medical science and a distrust in the medical profession. I mean, you've got this Back to the Vax organization, website, groups, things that you and your team member partner have put together. Is there anything that doesn't require going to the extreme levels that is able to redirect people that you've seen? And then I do want to talk about the Back to the Vax.
So there is a difference. So there's a difference between hesitancy and being anti-vax. Hesitancy can be easily cleared up with knowledge. Like it can be easily, like if you are just like, because it is confusing. It is so confusing, I encourage people not to confuse critical thinking and contrarianism. There's so many people that are like, you just don't know how to think critically. I'm like, if every single thing you believe is pushed by a very niche group of quote unquote experts, and it's against the narrative, you are not a critical thinker, you are a contrarian. And so I would encourage to drop the contrarianism and look at things through that hierarchy. So if there's a meta-analysis that proves a in vitro study wrong, guess what? Takes precedent, the top of the hierarchy. And that's what I've noticed is like anti-vaxxers will use those small and just alternative medicine, alternative wellness people will use, the very bottom of the pyramid to support their ideas and ignore stronger evidence to the contrary because they're wanting to confirm their bias. And if you're doing that, then your ideas are not evidence-based. And your thinking isn't critical because you would be able to determine like, oh, well, this bigger study proves that this little study is not correct.
Well, I can't help but think that being part of critical thinking is also being willing to be critical of your own beliefs and views and allowing for the evolution of them.
Yeah, leave your echo chamber and ask genuinely, because there's a difference. I have people that come to me and their questions are genuine and they are genuinely confused and they want to know. And then there are people that their questions are just statements in disguise and they don't actually want to know. Because if you bring them the stronger evidence, it's but the evidence is stronger according to the hierarchy. And oftentimes when I challenge people using that lens, they run away. They block me, they run away, they can't hold their own and they leave. And they'll say like I'm brainwashed or I'm a big pharma tool or whatever. But I tell them like I am begging you to bring me something verifiable. Bring me something not motivated by anecdotes, because anecdotes can be made by bots and they'll share bot-driven anecdotes as fact. And look, there's thousands of people dropping dead. Like, you realize like that happened before COVID vaccines. That was a thing. You can also realize that maybe letting a multi-organ virus rip through a population isn't going to be necessarily good for that population. It's a vascular disease, and as a vascular disease can affect any organ of the body, like maybe that's not a good thing. And that Occam's razor would state like any kind of deviation from normal health could be most likely blamed on that and not nanograms of a single piece of a virus. Like, why do you leap there? Why do you leap to blame the vaccine when you have a viral infection? It is unmitigated, going through your body, infecting your cells, destroying those cells, then leaving those cells, making copies of itself. Like, why do you think that's healthy? And why do you think a tiny vaccine isn't? And that Occam's razor, like the most the most reasonable or
Explanation is usually the right one.
Yeah, is usually the right one.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to prove something that doesn't really go with that, you're going to need a lot of evidence, and it's just not there.
It's fascinating because, I mean, we even saw just a couple of days ago, there was the tragic situation that happened at that football game. And it was interesting watching for me because years and years ago, I used to be a CPR instructor. And when the videos started rolling out over all of the social media, I watched that and my immediate reaction was, oh, see, precordial thumps do work sometimes. Obviously in a really tragic way in this outcome, but knowing the physiology of the heart muscle and looking where the impact took place and everything, my immediate reaction was like, oh, he got himself welded biologically. And it took no time. And that's a simple, easy, obvious explanation.
And they didn't even have evidence he was vaccinated. I don't know if they do now or not, but
I have no idea, but they jumped on that fast.
They just assumed. They don't even wait for confirmation anymore. There's a joke now, like anti-vaxxers land on a corpse faster than blowflies. Like, they're on it, and they are blaming the vaccine right away without even having like the full picture. They don't need it because they want to propagate that myth. That's how like it's not even a fact-based thing they're trying to spread. They want that to go around the world before it's even verified to be true. And they won't even like publicly recant it saying, oh, I was sorry about that, I made a mistake. They'll just like delete it quietly and move on to the next course. Like, it's so icky. The anti-vax movement has gotten a lot yuckier in terms of like morality. It's awful. They'll harass like grieving families. Anytime someone shares grief publicly, they don't even know how the person died. They're going, well, were they vaccinated? It's like, well, no, they had stage 4 cancer and they were fighting it for the last year, but thanks. Like, can you go somewhere else?
Yeah. I want to talk about back to the vax.
Yeah. Okay.
So how did that come to be, and what is it about?
So I saw Heather share her story on a pro-vaccine nonprofit, and it was similar but different to mine. And I approached her and I said, we should start a movement, a group where other parents like us can be open about their experience. Because a lot of times there's a lot of pressure when people return to vaccinating to just get it over with and do them all without understanding how anxious these parents are. We are an evidence-based group in that we do not promote any slow vaccine schedules or alternative schedules or middle of the road. Like this, you talk to your pediatrician or your doctor and work with them, and you do what your anxiety allows you to do. And oftentimes, if that's one vaccine, that is an acceptable reason, because if you can give your child one vaccine and then see that they're fine, you're going to be more inclined to do more. And so it's a no pressure way to help people start vaccinating their children, talk about their anxieties, ask an expert about some of their fears and have it better explained more thoroughly than maybe at a doctor's office, that is rushed. I've had members that were so scared they couldn't actually call to make an appointment, that their anxiety wouldn't let them do that. And I've made phone calls for them and then told them when their appointment is and explained to the receptionist, like, hey, this person is coming from a place where they thought vaccines were poisonous and were going to kill their child. Please handle them with care. Please be patient. And I highly recommend that they only have one nurse work with them so they don't have to keep explaining why their kids are so far behind on vaccination. And so I've done, we support each other in multiple ways, you know, and I think we're a niche group because a lot of people don't actually ever get that far if they believe vaccines are poison, but it's worth having because it's a very, like, people who haven't been there will be like, oh, just vaccinate your kids, it's fine. Like, they don't feel necessarily understood, or their fears don't feel understood. So it's good to have that group to get through those first steps, or, you know, we kind of coach each other on how to talk to healthcare staff to explain our situation so that there's not so much anxiety around it. And so, yeah, I think it's important. We only have 250 members right now. And I would say about half of them are moving forward with vaccination, and the other half are just kind of watching us quietly and just kind of entertaining the thought. But I think it's an important space to have.
Well, it seems like what you just described there is almost like an evidence-based version of that first forum that you talked about at the beginning,
Yeah.
where it's providing that place where parents who are anxious or apprehensive can talk about their concerns, but rather than being told, hey, try horseradish, they're being told, here's what the actual stuff says.
Yeah, exactly. Like, here's the evidence that you need to feel confident. And that's what it is. We want people, because there's a lot of like other like slow vaccine groups that are not evidence-based and they still believe vaccines are toxic, and then they promote all these like detoxes and herbs and stuff to support the immune system, and it's still a grift. Like, it's still putting money in selling books and whatever else. This is not like that. We don't support any of those ideas, and everything we share has to be like based in evidence. And the evidence is what helps you vaccinate with confidence and go, I am making the best risk benefit analysis choice for my family. Because the evidence, I've never been one to say side effects don't happen, adverse reactions don't happen, but the evidence favors vaccination.
Yeah.
Even with COVID vaccines, where billions have been given out, the evidence still favors vaccination.
And it's to me, I've always sort of equated it to a seatbelt. If you get into a car accident and you're wearing a seatbelt, there's a good chance that seatbelt's going to give you a bit of an injury. That injury is better than going through the windshield, though.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, when very bad things are a reality, mitigating those bad things is sometimes the best that we can do. And when vaccines offer the best source of mitigation, that's...
Yeah.
Where do people find, so you've got the website, you talked a little bit about some Facebook groups before we got into the interview proper. Where can people find some of this stuff?
So our page, like our public page, is Back to the Facts on
That's with
Facebook,
an F.
With an F, Facts, because Facebook, in an effort to fight misinformation, wouldn't let people use the word vax, which, okay, I guess that's effective. Not really. And then our private group is called Back to the Vax. And that has 5 experts now in it, where people can ask their questions. It's not medical advice. We encourage people to talk to their healthcare provider for that. And then right now I'm on Twitter under former anti-vax, but I'm taking a hiatus for a couple months. I got clinicals coming up too for my nursing, so I won't have a lot of time for that. And I'm also on Mastodon at Back to the Vax at mass.2, I think is what it is. And I do a TikTok, but TikTok is more an outlet for me to talk about anything and everything and not just vaccines. And I think that's it. And our website is backtothevax.com. And it has like a lot of our media and podcast things we've done. And I like to write articles up there, put them up sometimes. And there's a few stories from our members, because some of our members find it cathartic to write their journey out. And I found it very helpful to read other people who changed their mind as I was changing my mind. I really enjoyed reading about other parents that went through the same thing. So try to collect people's stories if they wish to tell it. Yeah, that's basically what our group is right now. We might move into some like more policy driven advocacy. I know Heather's talked in like government meeting type things to discuss policy regarding vaccination exemptions and that sort of thing, because they're getting more organized and petitioning like government to remove all exemptions. And I don't think that's the route we want to go. I'm a big fan of what Colorado did, which is to have parents who want a philosophical exemption or something like that to take a course, because it's actually quite effective in making them reconsider not vaccinating. And yeah, so like if after you go through all of that, you still don't want to vaccinate, fine, you can get your exemption, but you need to take this course first to have a better understanding. And I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of incentivizing. Australia has a pretty good incentivization program for vaccination that seems to keep the rate up quite well, although they have their anti-vax groups as well. So yeah, just kind of approaching it from that angle, and maybe going into a nonprofit someday that is specifically for it, because I think it's going to be really important in the next decade what we do. Like maybe not now because it was such a niche thing, but I think it's going to go mainstream right away. The vaccine hesitancy.
I got one last thing that I want to talk about, just because I think it's so awesome and I don't want to overlook it. Not only have you transitioned from the anti-vax, all of the rabbit holes, to the back to the vax, but you talked about the fact that you've got your clinicals coming up. You're actually pursuing your career in healthcare now.
Yeah, I am. And here's the thing, and this is, I kind of give attitude to anti-vax nurses, because I have Crohn's disease and I've been through some awful health issues. Like I almost died of sepsis. I've been through a lot, and I have compassion for people and I want to care for people. But when I went into the anti-vax movement, I put that dream on a shelf because I couldn't do something that I felt was morally objectionable. So in terms of like a nurse, I couldn't be a nurse and then tell people to vaccinate if I believed that caused harm. And so I don't know how people do those mental gymnastics and still want to be a nurse. Like it's a character judgment for me. I don't understand how you can hold those conflicting ideas and then go to work every day and collect a paycheck. Like it bothers me. And but about a year into vaccinating my kids and coming around on a lot of this stuff and just going more evidence-based, I'm like, I should become the nurse that I wanted to become, because I really do want to take care of people in some of the worst times of their life, and help them through that, because I remember how that feels, and so that's why I started. I want to be able to talk to parents when they're scared and they have their precious newborn infant, and they don't know what to do. I want to be able to maybe speak from experience and help reach them in a way that other people maybe can't, and eventually go on to provide primary care for my community. But yeah, I'm very happy to do nursing. I'm almost done. I should be finished this coming fall.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, if everything goes well, fingers crossed. It's gone pretty smoothly so far. So yeah, I'm very happy to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I think your story is just so amazing in that it runs the gamut from the We see it all too often. There's so many groups that are negatively affected on a long-term basis through negative interactions with the healthcare system, who go down some of the rabbit holes, and for you to come out the other end of the rabbit holes and be pursuing a career in public health and in medicine, I think is just absolutely inspirational. Is there anything that you would like to say to anything else you'd like to say to current healthcare workers about things that they can do to avoid maybe priming people a little bit? Not again, you were very clear about the responsibility piece.
Try not. People will always remember how you made them feel. You won't remember them next week. So, once you're in healthcare and you're seeing so many people come in and out, you're not going to remember them, but they'll remember you. And they'll remember how you made them feel, and they'll hold on to that. And so just try, and I mean, we're overworked now as ever, and that's not always going to be easy to remember. And I know not everyone has the best day at work, and that includes healthcare workers, but just really try to remember that people don't forget how you made them feel. And so try to approach patients with that in mind, even if they're saying something you don't agree with. Because it can be very frustrating. I get it,
What would you say, anything else that you would say to scared parents?
Regarding vaccines and autism, they don't cause autism. A lot that is still a myth that won't die. But there are really good studies out there with over 600,000 children. It's the sibling study. It's one of my favorite studies, but there's multiple studies that show no association. And in that study that I'm talking about, there is a completely unvaccinated group. MMR was the variable, but they have a group, I think it's like 4,500 unvaccinated kids that had no increase in autism or there was no decrease in autism. So the first sibling had autism, then the parents decided them, and they compared the siblings, because if there's autism is genetic, and if it is triggered by vaccination, you will see a decrease in autism in the siblings that aren't vaccinated, and that never happened. And in my own children, so I grew up, or I went through the anti-vax movement with a very ableist view on autism, and I thought it was like the worst thing that could ever happen to your child. And I'm not saying like autistic kids don't have struggles, they do, but the way it was described to me in these groups was just so awful, like it's going to ruin your life and ruin your marriage, and they just seem really resentful of the hand that they were dealt in their children. And anytime you have kids, there's a potential for them to not be typically healthy or typically neurotypical or whatever. Yeah. And I was so skewed on what autism was, I couldn't see my own son had autism. And I had people recommend it, like tell me, oh, you should get your son evaluated. And I was offended. It's like, how dare you say that about my son? He is beautiful and he is perfect, and you don't know anything about us. And after I started coming out of these like rabbit holes, and like, I was like, what if, oh my gosh, what if he is autistic? And he was 4 years old, going on 5, and I had we had him assessed, and he has level 2 autism spectrum disorder, and we hit the ground running. All of the therapy he has is evidence-based. He's done nothing but knock every single therapy goal out of the park. He is fully vaccinated now. And his little brother, like we submitted all these videos looking back, and even at age 2, my son had signs of autism. Like, it's so obvious, and I missed them, and he missed out on some therapy that could have maybe helped his potential go a little further. And I'll always carry that. I own that. I carry that with me, because it wasn't like nobody ever said to me, like, do you think your son could have autism? Because they did. And I was like, not hearing it. But his little brother got vaccinated at that same age. And so this is an anecdote, but my anecdote is supported by the evidence. And he did not have that same regression in skill and milestones, right? So in my case, like, vaccines didn't cause my son's autism because he was not vaccinated till he was almost 5. And I did all the crunchy things, and that's what these groups do, is they hand you this magic wand to keep all the bad things away from your children. And because parents want the best, it feels like something plausible. And so I did the organic thing, and I nursed him for 2 years, and I did all of the things, natural childbirth, all of that. And he is autistic, and that's okay, because the one thing I had to realize is he's still my beautiful, perfect boy, regardless. And now he just has all this extra support that he needs to reach his potential, which is amazing. Like, nothing bad happened from him getting diagnosed. Everything good happened. Everything, we get all these services that he needs to thrive. That's amazing. And so I also encourage, like, if you're like me and people have gently mentioned that to you, maybe investigate that. And also, like, if you've never vaccinated your kids or you're worried about autism, like, there is so much evidence. You can't really prove a negative, but anytime they try to prove it, they fail to prove it. And so don't ever worry that vaccines are going to give your kids autism. They're not.
That's awesome. Yeah, fail to prove it, and maybe lose their license to practice medicine, and maybe get charged criminally.
Yeah, maybe, right? Like, be careful who you pick as your hero, because, yeah.
Yeah. Lydia, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I have enjoyed this conversation so much, and it gives me a lot of hope in regards to watching the conversations that are going on, the fact that people are able to extricate themselves from this. And I mean, 250 people in your group, that is no small thing, because that's 250 people who are at the very least willing to entertain moving from where they were. And if you're saying half of them are already moving from where they were, that's a boatload of kids who are going to be way more healthy for it. So I think I'm just so happy we got to have this conversation.
Me too. I'm always happy to talk to Canadians. I don't get to talk to Canadians very often, and it makes me proud to contribute to try making our country a little healthier.
Awesome. The website, Back to the Vax. I'm looking at it right now in front of me, and at the very top, there's all of the links with the social media graphics for all of the things to find all of the things. Said that too many times. Lydia, thank you again so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have yourself a good day.
As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations. And we will see you next time on The Breakdown.